Liz Paul with welcome. I'm Liz Paul with Golden Eagle Audubon, and welcome to our program tonight. It is not State of the Great Salt Lake, that's next month, but tonight our program on the Camas National Wildlife Refuge, and we welcome everybody here tonight. Here are some of our upcoming events, though. It's never a dull moment. We're going to have a special program next month on June 11th. State of the Great Salt Lake. In our close neighboring state, Utah, the Great Salt Lake has really been in crisis with lowering water levels. And so Katie Newbern from Friends of Great Salt Lake is going to give a program on Zoom. It's going to start at 7 and talk about the Great Salt Lake and the issues facing it, the challenges, and some of the solutions that they're working on. So put that on your calendar. Tomorrow night, if you're interested in improving the habitat in your yard for birds and insects, we have a really awesome new presentation, Create a Bird-Friendly Yard. And I think Debbie Wiggins, who's going to be helping present this, is on the call this evening. And May 22nd, that's tomorrow at the Star Library at 6:30. That's free. Just show up, and we're going to be giving away pollinator plants that have been gifted to us from the Ada Soil and Water Conservation District. So that's super awesome. No registration needed for that. And then later on in June, on June 12th, another live presentation program all about bird feeders. So if you have all these questions, well, what bird feeders are better for this or better for that, or what birds can I bring to my bird feeders, or how do I make sure that it's safe and all that, put this on your calendar, 6:30 p.m. Again, no registration, and these are free programs at the Garden City Library. Coming up really soon is our member camping trip to Cold Springs Campground. And these photos, well, the bird photo I just got off online, but that's a Canada Jay, and it looks exactly like the one that Jim James and I saw yesterday. That middle photo is of Lost Valley Reservoir, and then on the right is the Cold Springs group campsite. It's only showing about half of it. Anyway, we're camping, and there's a lot of room. If you do have a camper, there's room for some more campers, or trailers, RVs. There's no hookups, and there's a lot of tent space. I'll be tenting it, and you can again go online, and we'll be birding for a full day and parts of 2 other days, and having campfire programs and Dutch oven desserts, and really fun. Oh, and we found wild peonies. Like the flowers there. Yeah, I've never seen them in the wild. Anyway, they're there. And then in August, we'll be going up into the Sawtooth to Bull Trout group campground. And this is some pictures from last year. We had a great time up there. And you're welcome to come. And kids are welcome too. We have a lot of field trips. I'm not going to list the field trips. I'm just going to show you some of the pictures. This is from the Wren Walk that was last weekend. And this is from the trip to Centennial Marsh on the Camas Prairie last weekend. Look at how beautiful it was. They saw a bazillion birds. All these trips, people are seeing bazillions of birds. This was our birding by ear trip last week in Hulls Gulch. Look at how happy birding makes everybody. It's great. And this was our what we call our beginner walk on the Bethune Church Trail. That was on Sunday, and everybody always sees a lot of birds on that trip. And this was our Mother's Day, part of the group from our Mother's Day special event up at Discovery Park. And all of our field trip leaders are volunteers. They do a fantastic job. And again, as you can see, birding makes you really happy, and going with Golden Eagle Audubon is always a treat. Our membership meeting, we are a local nonprofit, and we have an annual membership meeting for everybody, and ice cream is on the menu. That's on June 4th, 6:30 to 7:30 in Kristen Armstrong Park in Boise. And then at the end of June, we're having a volunteer appreciation party for all of you that donate so much of your time and energy. And that's going to be at the Foothills Learning Center. And all these events are on our calendar, on our website, as well as nice, easy ways for you to join. Membership starts at $25 a year, or make a special donation, which we accept 24/7, 365 days a year. All right. That. All right, 35 people. Awesome. Again, you can use the chat to say hi to each other. Cynthia, we have our wonderful Executive Director, Cynthia Wallace, with us this evening.
Hello, thank you, Liz. Thanks everyone for joining us. I really appreciate you participating in our monthly programs, and it's great, yes, that we can do this via Zoom. And thanks, Liz, for putting this together and coordinating all of those great trips and everything. So I saw that it was at least one person's first time, so welcome, and hope you can join us for more things. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from Lucian. Lucian was on the board of directors for a while, and so it'll be fun to hear from him again. So welcome, Lucian and Tim. And without further ado, I'll pass it back over to Liz, who I believe will introduce Lucian.
Yes, we're going to start with Tim, and Tim Reynolds is the current and past president of another awesome Idaho nonprofit, Friends of Camas National Wildlife Refuge. And that group, he'll tell you more about it, but they have had their work cut out for us. They're basically in partnership with the federal government, must be the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and to manage this area, and I'm sure that they get relied on for a lot of things. So he's going to give an overview of both the area as well as the challenges and the opportunities there, and how you can help support their work. And then our second speaker, who I will introduce is Lucian Davis, as Cynthia said, who is the lead bander with the Intermountain Bird Observatory over there at Camas right now. So Tim, go ahead. There's Lucian. Yeah. We're so lucky to have both of these people spend some time with us this evening. So go ahead, Tim, and share your screen. Let's get your program up there. And this is being recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel. There you go, and you're good to go. And put your questions in the chat. We will get to them after Tim has finished.
Okay, so excuse me, I'm Tim Reynolds. As Liz said, I'm both the past and current president of the Friends of Camas, and that's there's too many details to go into there to share. But I do want to tell you first thing tonight, I'm not on my A game. I was diagnosed with bronchitis today. I've been sick for 3 days, and so I might run out of gas during this. So I apologize for that. I'm letting you know up front. What I want to do, though, is share a little bit about Camas National Wildlife Refuge, tell you somewhat about the history, where it's located, how to get there, as well as some of the challenges they've had over the years, particularly with water, and how they've resolved those challenges. And then I want to talk a little bit about the Friends of Camas itself, an organization that has been very, very successful with very small amount of support and not very large in terms of membership. So I'll just move on. I've got a lot of pictures. I'm going to be quiet during some of this and save my voice. And there's picture. I've taken a bunch of photographs from people who are very common out at the refuge, taking pictures. Here's their names. I'm not going to give credit for individual pictures, but there's their names. They're great photographers, and you'll get to experience some of their wonderful photography. So off to Camas. Okay, so on the left of the screen, you can see Napa and Boise, the metropolitan center of Idaho, and the east, you see Camas National Wildlife Refuge, which is in Jefferson County, a county which just 2 years ago got their third stoplight. So, different environment. Camas National Wildlife Refuge is on the upper River Plain. This is all sagebrush and basalt. Its dark area in the middle is Craters of the Moon National Monument. So, and these are the paved roads between you and me. Camas up here, Boise, Napa over here. And you can get to Camas using any of those roads. I've mapped them out for you on the next few slides. This route here, the interstate, Highway 84 and 86, you take a left, follow, get off at exit 150, and follow the signs to Camas. This route, it's 311 miles. It takes just under 4 hours and a half. If you like a boring drive but like to drive fast, this is your route. Another route that adds a little bit more interest is you get off at this and go through Shoshone, Cary, Arco, go up to the west side of the Idaho National Laboratory to Howe, come across the place called Sage Junction, go up to exit 150 to and follow the signs to Camas. This trip is almost 60 miles shorter, and it's 8 minutes shorter. Interesting. The variation on that drive is to drop and go down the southern portion of the Idaho National Laboratory, go into Idaho Falls, where you may want to have a motel selected, because there is very few places to stay in Idaho Falls and Camas Refuge. The last route, and this is the one I take. I live over here in Rigby on the right-hand side here. And I come down when I go to Boise and take this. This allows you the opportunity to go through Camas Prairie, the Centennial Marsh. You're also out here by, you can go by the Silver Creek. Yeah, the Silver Creek area. There's great birding all along the way. It says it only takes 4 hours and 11 minutes. It's for a non-birder. For the rest of us, you know, it takes a little bit longer. But it's the shortest route. Once you take exit 150 on Interstate 15, you get to the gateway community to Camas National Wildlife Refuge, which is Hamer, Idaho. In Hamer, this is it. This is the entirety of Hamer right here. Hamer has a population of 38. It is one of the few towns in Idaho that in recent times has petitioned to become disincorporated, and they are no longer a town. They are a ward of the county. They have no gas stations, no restaurants. They have one taco wagon, no lodging, no bars, and one church. Tourist services for fuel are in both Roberts and DuBois. Roberts is 16 miles south of the refuge, DuBois 18 miles north. DuBois has lodging, the Beaver Creek Inn. They remodeled all of their 10 rooms this last year. I've not seen them, but I've heard that they are acceptable. DuBois has one restaurant occasionally, and Roberts has 2 restaurants. One, I think, which is open only in the morning for breakfast. There's a pizza place that only has takeout pizza. And for bars, there's one in DuBois and 2 in Roberts. There's full city services, of course, are in Rexburg, which is 28 miles southeast, Rigby, which is south-southeast, 30 miles, and Idaho Falls, which is our largest metropolitan area on this side of the state. And that has all the services and amenities you would expect of a city of 65,000. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about itself now. We're in the upper Snake River Plain, sagebrush dominated habitat. It was established in 1937. FDR was president at the time. The executive order established the refuge as a refuge and breeding ground for migratory birds and other wildlife. And back in the 30s, when they talked about migratory birds, they did not mean finches and warblers and vireos. They meant waterfowl. And this, like many of the refuges established established at that time of the in the century were for waterfowl production, migratory waterfowl. But we have a phrase that says conservation, management, and restoration of the fish, wildlife, and plant resources and their habitats for the benefit of present and future generations. Although the refuges were established specifically for waterfowl, this kind of opened the door to management and conservation of other aspects of the wildlife environment. So this was a working cattle ranch. The refuge itself is about 10,600 acres. It was once a working cattle ranch. Over 8,000 acres were one particular ranch, and then 28 other ranches made up the rest of the refuge. It was a Works Progress Administration site, which is similar to the CCC in that it created jobs for people who were unemployed to do something meaningful for the country. In this case, it was to establish and maintain and set up the infrastructure for wildlife refuges. So in the lower left-hand corner here, there's one building here. That's the only building standing that remains of any of the 29 ranches that occurred on the refuge. This big building here was a family home, the Wood Livestock Ranch, which is now the site of the Camas National Wildlife Refuge headquarters building. The building was taken away when the property was sold. Some facts about the refuge. Like I say, it's just under 10,600 acres. About half of the refuge is wet, marsh and ponds, and 50% is sagebrush steppe habitat, meadows, and we do have a couple of farm fields. And those farm fields are important for certain wildlife, and particularly sandhill cranes. The temperature range, this is the upper Snake River Plain, and the temperature on Camas has ranged from 48 below zero to 105 above. So that's a 150-degree temperature swing, which is scary, to be honest. Average precipitation, it's arid here, under 9 inches of rain, even though the records show that you get rain 61 days out of the year, and that's miserable rain. It's not very much. And the only months that have more than an inch of rain are March or June and May and June. Snowfall, even though it's highish elevation, just under 5,000 feet, they don't get that much snowfall out there, maybe 20 inches in a good year. The average number of snow days is only 16. And the majority of the snow, as you would expect, falls in December and January. Like I mentioned, the elevation is just under 5,000 feet, and it's incredibly flat. The high point and the low point on a refuge is about 20 feet. So this is what the refuge looks like over here on the right-hand side. Now, odd shaped. That's because there was a big piece of property and then little parcels that were added onto it over the years. The refuge has been interested in acquiring this to square it up a little bit, and maybe some of this, but they have not been particularly successful. This here is private land. This, I believe, is mostly BLM land. And I've included on this slide Mud Lake. I'm going to talk about that more later on in the program. But Mud Lake is maybe 15 to 20 miles at the most from the refuge itself. And Mud Lake is a fish and game wildlife management area, and I'll bring that up later. Oh, Camas National Wildlife Refuge does not have a single Camas plant on it. It's named Camas because of the creek under the refuge and provides a great deal of the water in the spring. You see Camas Creek here and Camas Creek here. The creek actually starts on the other side of these egg fields, and up off the screen, there's a Camas Meadows near Kilgore, Idaho, and above that you have the east and west Camas Creek at the base of the Centennial Mountain. And that provides the major to the site, and also is the reason for the name Camas. And here's what the refuge looks like when we got a good water year. There's quite a number of ponds. The This is not a common sight anymore. It hasn't been for a number of years. A little bit of the water history. Prior to, well, let me back up. Prior to settlers coming here, water on the refuge area was frequent and the result of snowmelt. Very dry most of the time. You had great annual variation in the water as all the result of the snowpack. 1910 to about 1990, the wetlands were consistent and there was a very high water table on the refuge. And then starting in about 1990 and continuing through today, the wetlands are artificially maintained. There's not enough water from Camas Creek, nor there is a high enough water table anymore to support the refuge as we like to think of it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the water table. This zero here, this is ground level. And any dots above zero means the water table is actually ponded. It's a little lake. Any dot below zero is the water table below surface level. And if you notice, in the 70s, in the 80s, we had ponded water on the refuge commonly. And if you come into the 2000s and down to 2018 here, our water table is now 20 feet below the surface. And that's a huge decline in terms of hydrology. One of the reasons, on the left, we have a picture of Camas Refuge, an aerial photo from the 50s. And on the right, we have one from, I think 2010 or there. I can't read at the top of my screen. I'm not sure what it is. But you notice the big difference. You have all these center pivot irrigations. Each of these represents a pump. It's got a straw down into the aquifer taking water. And that's an impact on the water that's available then to the refuge. But the biggest impact has to do with the changing of irrigation practices on the Eden Bench. This block here is called the Eden Bench. The refuge again is over on the left. When the Mormon settlers came here in the early 80s, mid 1880s, they immediately started diverting water from the Snake, this river here, diverting water from Henry's Fork of the Snake, flood irrigate their fields. And when they did that, flood irrigation is not efficient in terms of water use. And a lot of extra water flowed off the fields and actually percolated down because it wasn't used for transportation. And it went underground and surfaced in Camas. Camas had great water starting in about 1910 and lasting until about 1990. 1980 or so is when the farmers and ranchers, the Eden Hemer Bench, converted to sprinkler irrigation. Many center, some wheel line. They were more efficient in their water use. Less water traveled underneath the Snake and popped up at Camas. So there's been a great loss of water. So now, in order to maintain Camas, even as a shadow farmer self, you have to divert water out of Camas Creek. We always use Camas Creek water. It's 10 large irrigation pumps and 13 miles of ditches and structures in order to get water to where it's going to be useful for wildlife. So this has had an incredible impact on the waterfowl. And remember, the refuge was established for waterfowl. If you look on the left, our data from 1960 to 1969, so a decade. You notice that the divers, which are the dark blue, the geese, which are so dark, and the lighter blue are grebes. They were a pretty robust population. Geese were, 1,200 or maybe average 1,150 geese a year. Grebes much more. I'm sorry, divers were 1,150. If you go to the next slide on the right, where the decade from roughly 2018, the population numbers have just crashed. and there's still a pretty good diversity, but the numbers of birds that use the refuge is diminished tremendously because there's not enough water. Even a more tragic example with the diving duck. You get about 7,500 diving, or I'm sorry, puddle ducks. 7,500 puddle ducks averaged each year for the decade in the 60s. Now we're 1,000 maybe. So it's sad, pretty tragic. It all has to do with water. So there has been a lifeline thrown to the Camas National Wildlife Refuge. The Great American Outdoors Act was passed in 2020, and this authorizes $1.9 billion with a B dollars to be used on national parks, refuges, forests, recreations, and for American Indian schools. This is a huge amount of money that comes from a tax on offshore oil development. This 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, Camas National Wildlife Refuge was fortunate to receive nearly $8 million. And this money is to be used for water distribution improvements and to elevate the visitor experience. So, to enhance the visitor experience, they have built a second vault toilet on the site. Up until this last year, the only facilities were the headquarters building, the only vault toilet on the site. You traveled the auto route and were, an hour or two away from headquarters, and you were, well, I don't do anymore. Wonderful viewing tower that is still under construction. There's some design issues they're wrestling with, but hopefully those will be resolved. And by next year, the viewing tower will be providing opportunities to enhance the visitor experience. Also, they have made a number of pathways that are now ADA compliant. These beautiful rail fences. We're going to update the signage. The signage on the refuge is 30 years old or so. Some things have changed for sure. We're going to include some of the Shoshone-Bannock interpretation or Shoshone-Bannock language on the interpretive signs. So the tribes are involved in the signage and the education. So with all this money, the engineers and the biologists had to get together and decided how could they maximize the benefit to the wildlife resources on the refuge. And so what they did was look at all of the various ponds, and they had to say, well, some of these ponds are really, if we keep them full, they're not going to be as good as some of the other ponds. And so they high graded the ponds. The ones that are in gray, on priority ponds, and those will only be filled when there is an abundance of water, snowmelt water coming through Camas Creek and Warm Creek. You can read the little deal down here in the corner as well as priority pond, secondary pond. They decided which ponds were important, and they decided how to better move water. This particular ditch here, and there is a ditch or a canal, this starts way at the northern end of this tree line, just at the edge of the refuge, over a mile away where water first gets into a pond. So this mile-long ditch, up until last year, would lose 50% of the water that was introduced at the north end by the time it got to the pond. So we were essentially giving away 50% of our water. So the ditch was blind. They improved water transportation structures of all sorts. And they moved some of the wells. Many of the wells were put in at the north end of the site years ago because they were going to keep part of that refuge still under agriculture. Over years, things have changed. They moved some pumps. They're closer to where the water is going to be useful. We're not going to lose as much through the canals, and it's going to work. There's no question about it. And the big thing is that they solar powered these big irrigation pumps. So there's, I think, 10 of them on the site, and it costs the somewhere between $85,000 and $100,000 a year to run those pumps to put water in the ponds. With the solar powered arrays, these are generating solar power in the winter when the pumps aren't being run. And so all that power goes into a bank with the power company. And in the summer, you know, these pumps only run during the day. And so we're spending some of that bank. And at night, the pumps are still running and we're spending a little more of the bank. This is the first year we've had these in operation. And so we don't know how much we're going to save. I'm certain that the $100,000 power bill is going to be in the rearview mirror. And this is working. So far this year, we've got water in ponds where we haven't seen water in years. The vegetation looks crummy. We had heavy equipment in there doing all the things that heavy equipment does to improve the water conveyance. But we've got water, and I expect this will become the new normal. And in spite of 40 years of water challenges, Camas continues to support a wide range of wildlife. You know, this is, well, we've got 32 species of butterflies, which to me seems like quite a lot. I know very little about butterflies other than they're beautiful, and 32 seems like a lot of species to me, including monarchs. There's a half a dozen species of reptiles, which are all, you know, there's nothing unique about these. These are fairly common to the upper snake region. Sagebrush lizard, western skinks. If you've never seen one of these are just beautiful lizards, very fine scales. And the most beautiful of all is this long-nosed leopard lizard. And this is 13 inches long or so. And the males get orange around these ocelli in the breeding season. 3 species of snakes: terrestrial garter snake, gopher snake or bull snake. And this is probably the most common snake on the refuge. And then the western of the Great Basin rattlesnake. And I've been going out to the refuge for 30 years. I've never seen one of these. The herpetologists from SU came and did a focus survey, and they ran across it. And the refuge hosts habitat for all of the ungulates you would expect in the upper Snake Plain. Moose are year-round residents. Elk are not only year-round residents, but their population has increased enough that this last year the Fish and Game started an experimental hunt out there to see if they could try and keep the elk from hiding from hunters on the refuge. And I don't have any data. I don't know how that worked last year. We have deer. We have 2 species of deer. We have the white-tailed deer and the mule deer. And these are on a refuge. White-tailed buck, if you are a deer person, this is a monster. This mule deer buck over here is certainly a pretty good trophy itself. And pronghorn antelope, they are here on the refuge year round, as all the ungulates. The predators, this is, I love these guys. Weasel, long-tailed weasel. They're fairly common. Skunks are common on the site. Foxes, got red foxes. And this is a red fox that's either a blue fox or a cross fox. It's a variety of the normal red fox. And our biggest predator is the coyote, quadrupedal predator. There's a number of smaller animals there. You know, porcupines are fairly common, very fun to watch. There's 4 species of rabbits, or megamorphs on the refuge. Got the rabbit here on the right, cottontail. Here's a black-tailed jack, and they also have the white-tailed jack. But Camas is known for its birds, and indeed they still get birds. You guys, I think, got all of our snow geese this year. Some years there's 20,000 to 30,000 snow. Use the refuge for a week or 10 days. North. The refuge, once again, was established for waterfowl. Even with the poor water, the numbers of waterfowl are down, as I showed you in those graphs. The diversity, the number of species, is up. There's 16 species of waterfowl that nest in the refuge, including trumpeter swans. And during migration, we get a number of these guys. And of course, the iconic sage. They lek out there, they nest out there, and in some years they winter there on the snow depth. There's 5 species of owls on the site. The short-eared owl, the great horned owl, barn owl, burrowing owls, and the long-eared owl. There's 7 species of birds of prey, including the owls, that nest on the refuge. The northern harrier, red-tailed hawk, Swainson's hawks, ferruginous hawk. So up until 7 or 8 years ago, we didn't have any bald eagles. The pair set up shop on one of the old cottonwood tree lines. We've had successful nesting for the last 6 years. Peregrine falcons, and of course the American minstrel. So even with the lack of water, we still have a great number of water birds besides the waterfowl that are there. This is a forester's tern. This is a redneck grebe. This is a migrant. This is a nest there. Eared grebes, bullets, and I'm not going to just show you many more bird pictures because you'll have to come out and see them in real life. You gotta love these guys, the young coots. They're so ugly, they're beautiful. Sandhill cranes nest. Herons, American bitterns, Sora. And this is the logo species for Friends of Camas. This is the white-faced ibis. And if you catch them in the right light, these colors are real. And beautiful greater yellowlegs, avocets. These are all nesters. And the iconic long-billed curlew. But what Camas is really known for, and this is what's brought out in these older bird trail books and Birder's Guide to Idaho, what it's really known for are their migratory songbirds. They're neotropical migrants. So Camas is designated as one of these Idaho birding trail sites. Got good vegetation. I got to mention the Wilson's warbler. The sign on the left is about the birding trail, talks about the Wilson's warbler. When the banding study that Lucian's going to talk about later first began, they noticed that in the fall migration, when these Wilson warblers were coming down from the north, there was a bunch of them, and they ended up banding 4,200 Wilson's warblers in 2 fall banding sessions. An extraordinary number. And this, someone can correct me, I think this is a Hammond's flycatcher, but one of the migrants that's frequently caught. And this is a western. This is one of my favorites, the common yellow-throated. These nest on the refuge. So I mentioned earlier I pointed out Mud Lake and was going to talk a little bit more about it. These are 3 pages for the Idaho Birding Guide. One is Mud Lake Wildlife Management Area. We got Camas here and Market Lake Wildlife Management Area. These 3 spots, Mud Lake, Camas, and Market Lake, are absolutely migrant bird magnets. These birds these sites have trees, they have water, they have everything that a migratory bird needs in order to stop and fuel up and continue on the migration. If you notice, everywhere outside of these refuges, it's either farmland or safe. So these are areas for migratory birds. And this is something I put together years ago. It's not, I tried to update it the other day. But these are all the rare bird sightings, and the definition of rare birds is from the Records Committee. All the rare bird sightings seen at Market Lake, Mud Lake, and Camas National Wildlife Refuge. And the thing that just blows me away is the number of first state records. First state record. And some of those were years ago when there was a lot of water. But the most recent, the great crested flycatcher, was in 2017, and we didn't have a lot of water. So there's still a good chance to see a very exciting bird for the first time. I'm going to show some of the first state records, and I think Dave Lawrence at the side of the state stole this picture from the Birds Records Committee site. But Elise Bitter, first seen on Camas National Wildlife Refuge. White-eyed vireo, first state record. I got to say that Camas is very, very lucky. Some of their birders are also extraordinary photographers. And that list I had at the beginning of the show included, I think it was Darren Clark. He raises it to a new level. Black-throated green warbler, seen for the second time only, third time in the state last year, second time at Camas last year. Prairie warbler, first state record. And the orchard oriole, first state record. And I threw this other guy in because there's only been one record ever at Camas of the rusty blackbird. It's been seen elsewhere in the state, but it's very, very rare, particularly on this side of the state. So when you come to Camas, and I sure hope you do, there are some rules. It's open from the refuge is open from a half hour before sunrise to half hour after. No drones, no drone photography. It's closed to big game hunting except for this experimental hunt. There's no camping, no potable water except at the headquarters. 2 vault toilets, one of which is not quite completed yet. But when you come, you've got this beautiful auto tour route to go on. You've got the birding trail to go on. You've got the pollinator garden to visit, and we'll get to that in just a second. And you've got the pavilion where you can picnic and get out of the sun. I throw this in because this is my favorite bird on the refuge, the sage thrasher. I just love these guys, the way they can carry on and display. I want to talk a little bit now about the Friends of Camas organization. And I am not sure how much you know about Friends organizations, but there's 585 national wildlife refuges. And about 30 or 40% of those have a not-for-profit Friends of Insert Your Refuge name organization. And we are one of those. And we've been around since 2011. We started as an unincorporated nonprofit association. And that was a unique name that the Fish and Wildlife Service had trouble accepting. So we became incorporated in 2014, and we're a 501(c) nonprofit, all volunteer, no paid staff. And we've got about 100 members, of which maybe 40 or 50 regularly pay their dues. What we do, our mission is to foster environmental education, conservation, and scientific study on the refuge for the benefit of the resources and enjoyment by the visiting public. And neither one of those has greater priority than the other. Our education, we are fortunate, we've always been fortunate to have at least 1 or 2 retired educators on our board. And they do yeoman's work. They host a STEM day at the zoo in Idaho Falls. They're involved in Earth Day. They're at the school field trips. We have a World Migratory Bird Day celebration, which we just did this last weekend. We participate in the Henry's Fork Wildlife Alliance Festival, which is up in Island Park. And then we usually have 3 public events every year. Our organized public events include one of our old cottonwood tree lines is used extensively by wintering bald eagles. In the second or third week of February, when it's just bitterly cold, we'll get 80 to 100 bald eagles that come to roost every night. So we have an event. We invite people out on a Saturday afternoon. We provide cookies, we provide chocolate, we provide spotting scopes, and these eagles fly in at sunset, and they'll fly in as low as the power lines. They'll fly right over your head, and it's a thrilling. Started this 5 years ago. We had no idea how it would work. The first year we had 120 participants and 100 eagles. And ever since it's been quite as many eagles, but we've always had a great turnout. People love it, even though some days it's absolutely miserable. We hold a birds, bugles, and brunch. This is our annual members meeting, but the public is invited. We have kids activities, we have hay rides. Fish and Game provides their Bear Aware trailer or their Citizens Against Poaching trailer. Hay ride. This is the former refuge manager, Ann Weehausen, who is responsible for actually writing the grant and implementing the Great American Outdoors Act money we got to make the refuge so much better. The birds, bugles, and brunch includes kids activities of various sorts, building birdhouses, looking at checks, and of course we have a brunch. It's often but not always a Dutch oven brunch. And we have a birdathon every year. This is our fundraiser, which we share with the Snake River Audubon Society. And this is actually occurring this week. What we do is birders go out any day they want in the week before Memorial Day and record all the birds they see. And we encourage the birders to get sponsors to donate maybe $1 a bird or $2 a bird or whatever it is. And we usually raise between $5,000 and $6,000 a year for going birding. And it's split between the two organizations, and both organizations end up doing good conservation work with the dollars we've earned by. This year we're going to try something we've never tried before. There's a national-wide National Wildlife System a 5K walk during National Wildlife Refuge Week called Walk for the Wild. And you get people to walk 5K on your refuge. And it's because it's a federal sponsored thing, even though it's shared with nonprofits, they can't charge a registration fee. So you try and encourage people to enjoy their walk to the point that they will donate some money. And so we're going to try that this year, see how it works. It's iffy. Fall or October in southeast Idaho can be 85 degrees. You can be shoveling snow. So the Camas projects over the years. This is a pavilion we built. We got a grant to build this thing. Well, I wanted to mention, if you're not familiar with how friends groups work with refuges themselves, the refuges are federal. They have certain missions and certain things that they have to spend their money on, certain things that are priorities. At many national wildlife refuges, you'll find gift shops. Those are usually run by the Friends group because the federal government is not in the business of selling hats and t-shirts and that sort of thing. We were giving lots of presentations out on the refuge, and there was no place for the kids to sit. There's no place to get out of the shade. The refuge didn't have the dollars to, or wasn't in their mission necessarily to have a pavilion or a place for people to sit down and have educational activity. We got a grant with one for them. Years ago, for those of you who are older, you might remember back in the 70s, there was a huge problem nationwide with DDT going up the food chain and making the eggshells for under birds of prey very, very thin. The birds would sit on the eggs, they'd crack, and they weren't producing any young. And so in the early 80s, because peregrine falcons were imperiled at that time, they built a hack tower thing on the lower left. This box is up here. In the Peregrine Fund and Idaho Power and the Wildlife Refuge and the Fish and Game were all involved in this. Put a couple of young peregrines out, put them in a box, raised them wild birds. And they raised and they did that 2 or 3 years in a row. And they came back the 3rd year or 4th year, and there were already peregrines on the nest. So they had introduced birds into the wild that returned back to this nest. And for over 30 years, we had peregrines nesting on the refuge. So we thought, well, this is a thing we need to share. A webcam there. Take support from the Idaho falconers to do this. And we had birds nesting there for another 4 or 5 years. And unfortunately, the string of birds was broken. There was the last time, and this was 3 years ago, there was a older male who had returned with a new female. His mate had apparently perished. He brought back a new lady, and they mated and produced an egg, and actually 2 eggs. And early in the incubation process, the young male came and drove the mature male off. The young female would have nothing to do with this young interloper. She abandoned her nest, and sadly, we haven't had a peregrine on the nest since. And we're not sure how to resolve that. So another project that Friends of Camas has done is a pollinator garden. And this is the refuge headquarters here on the left. And for years, they maintained this nice grassy yard, and it had no conservation value, no educational value, and it was a headache. Friends of Camas said, pollinator garden. And so this is what it looked like last year. Also are very involved in scientific study. Several members of the board, including myself, come from the science world. We've either helped with dollars or with volunteers put radio collars on swans, both on our refuge as well as other refuge in the East Idaho Refuge Complex, to see where they go. We've supported the bat monitoring project on the refuge, monarch monitoring. For 2 years, we worked with Safari Club International, the Idaho Department of Fish and Game, and the Race Fork Wildlife Alliance to put radio collars on pronghorn antelope. Pronghorn antelope that spend the summers east of I-15 used to winter on or near the refuge. And they can't anymore because of the high fences along the highway, along I-15. And so we had radio collars on these guys to see where points were and where some wildlife safe passage to be developed. And starting this year, we're going to do a similar study for elk. The range that would include the refuge itself. And the biggest project we've been involved in the last 2 years is, oops, what have I done? Sorry. The biggest project we've done in the last little bit is this bird banding project. I don't know why this wants to pass me forward, but Lucian's going to take over for me now. If you want to learn more about Friends of Camas and what we do, how we do it, where we do it, here's our website and our email. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to be in front of you guys tonight. And I hope that you've got some good questions to answer later. Thank you.
Oh, that's great, Tim. That was awesome. That was awesome. Lots of endurance. There you go. Take a little rest. We'll see if some questions come in, and we'll let Lucian talk, and then people can your voice can rest up a little bit. Excellent. Wow, I learned so much. Let me just say, so you're not surprised your connection was a little iffy, so a few words got lost, but you had great slides, so that made up for it. Okay.
Thank you so much.
So, without further ado, Lucian Davis, who did serve on the board of directors of Golden Eagle Audubon is our next speaker. He is a recent graduate of Boise State University with a degree in biology and a emphasis on ecology and a few other things that prepared him well to be in the bird conservation world. He has worked for the Intermountain Bird Observatory for 7 years, worked with and for, and so he has banded thousands of birds. And he is the lead bander now in this banding program that he'll talk about at the Camas National Wildlife Refuge. So go ahead and pull up your slides there, Lucian, and we'll get going.
Okay. Okay, let me get this situated. Okay, here we go.
That looks great. Lucian
Awesome.
Davis.
Yeah, so as Liz said, my name is Lucian Davis, and I am currently the lead bander at the with the Songbird Banding Project at Camas. So just quick about me, Songbird bander with the Intermountain Bird Observatory. I've been birding and banding since 2018. I started as a volunteer when I was in high school, and now this is going to be my 4th year as one of the crew members for either the Camas banding crew or our Lucky Peak project back in Boise. So before I get into some of the details about the banding project at Camas, I think probably most people on here have heard about banding from me or visited one of the banding stations, been to one of my previous presentations with Golden Eagle about our Lucky Peak site. But in case you aren't familiar with songbird banding, I can give kind of a brief description of what songbird banding is. And so this picture on the left here is a picture of one of the nets that we used last year at Camas. And so these nets are known as mist nets. These are how we capture the birds for songbird banding. You can see in this photo how you're only really seeing the net well where the wind is catching or it's overlapping. This net is not really visible to birds until they're either already in it or too close to back up, generally speaking. And so they'll hit the net, they'll sort of fall into a pocket in the net, and then we will come and get them out of the net. The net generally wraps a little bit around their head, a little bit around their wings, and so we can free them from that, and then we bring them back to the banding station, which at Camas is in the pavilion that Tim was talking about. And so then back at the banding station, the first thing we'll do is put the actual band on them. And these are really lightweight aluminum bands. They each have a unique 9-digit number. You can think of it like a bird's social security number. Every bird has a different number. So if we recapture that bird, which we do recapture birds pretty frequently, at least from our own station, then we can look up that band number and find out, when it was originally banded, how old it was then, who banded it, all that, all the information that we're taking when we band it. We're also going to be taking a variety of different measurements and looking at their body condition. So we'll measure their wing and their tail. We'll get a weight on them. We can actually blow apart their feathers and see birds have see-through skin. And so we can see the fat and the muscle underneath their skin. And so we can gauge how much fat the bird has. A bird that's getting ready to migrate is going to be storing a lot of fat. So we're able to see that on them. And that can be an indicator of oh, this is a bird that is using this site to get ready for the next leg of its migration. So, collecting all that data, we are looking at, we're basically looking at evidence of previous molt of their feathers to determine how old they are. There's other things we can look at, but that's kind of the main thing. We're able to tell if a bird was hatched last year or if it was hatched before last year. For songbirds, we generally can't tell anymore specifically than that, unless it's a recaptured bird and we can look up that data and find out like, oh, this bird was banded in, 2015 or something, which doesn't really happen at Camas, but happens a lot at our Lucky Peak site. The bird here is an American robin, a very familiar bird for, I think, most people. And these are one of our most common captures at Camas, particularly in the spring season. So this is a bird from earlier in this season. So why are we banding at Camas? Banding gets us a lot of really important information that other methods like, doing a survey, just like going out and counting the birds couldn't really get us. Having the birds in hand lets us see, what I was talking about with fat. Are these birds able to use this site to fuel up for migration? Being able to determine the age of a bird can tell us really important things about the population, which I'm going to get into a little bit later. So basically banding lets us keep tabs on bird populations, how birds are using a site in ways that is often not really possible just from a survey. Of course, it's a lot more intensive, but it can get us some really valuable data. And so to expand a little bit more on why we're banding here right now, Jay Carlisle, Intermountain Bird Observatory's research director, actually led a songbird banding project at Camas from 2005 to 2007. So this is a photo of Jay back in one of those years extracting a bird from one of their mist nets. And this is another photo of the area right around the banding station. This is little Wilson's warbler. I found this photo really striking because was looking at all of this is in the same area that we have some of our nets right now. We've tried to keep the net locations mostly the same as that previous study. And all these green trees in the background here, a lot of those trees are not so green anymore. And generally, as Tim was talking about, the refuge has lost a lot of water. And that's part of why we're coming back here now. So back in 2005 to 2007, the area around the nets, a lot of the vegetation, there's a lot more vegetation, and a lot of the vegetation that is now dead was alive back then. So we want to see what the difference is between those 2005 to 2007 seasons and then now. So they did 2 spring and 2 fall seasons then, and we're coming back and doing 2 spring and 2 fall seasons now. And so, our idea had been back then to come back. Well, I say our idea, I wasn't around then, but Jay's idea then was to come back in another 5 years to kind of check on how it was going. And basically due to a lack of funding, that didn't happen until now. And so I'm really glad that is able to happen now. Almost 20 years later, but we're still getting, we're getting really valuable data from that. So I'm happy to be here. So I'm focusing my little section of this talk mostly on the spring seasons. So I have here a little bit of comparison. I promise this is my most graph heavy slide of spring seasons from 2006 and 2007, and then the 2 recent spring seasons. So on the left here, we have this graph of 2006 to 2007. So we can see their peak of the season then for both years was like starting sort of mid-May into early June. And that's what we've been seeing these few years too. And so a fairly similar pattern. It's pretty normal during migration to have a lot of ups and downs as birds come in sort of waves as they're migrating. What was really striking to me here is this 2006 to 2007 season, during their peak, there were many days that were approaching 100 birds. And then we have a few days in the 2006 season where they looks like almost 200, which was not the case for us back in the 2023 season. And so this is the 2023 captures. Our highest day last year was 86. And then, we had some other really high days around there, generally lower captures. that last year's season started with days usually between like 10 to 20 to 30 birds, and then picked up during those like 3-ish weeks of peak migration, where, you know, we started getting like 40, 50 birds, and then would have, you know, days of 70, 80 plus birds, and then it drops down again. So the 2006 and 2007 season both had, you know, we have 2,286 birds, 2006, 1,887, 2007. And then this past spring was pretty significant dip from that, 1,412. The species composition has also changed quite a bit, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. But for now, I'm just talk about the numbers a little bit. So this spring started out pretty differently than last spring. It took us until about 2 weeks into the season to get a day. We had a few days like 18, 19 birds, but it was like 2 or 3 weeks in the season before we broke 20 birds pretty recently. And so it started out very, very slow, a lot slower than last year, which is also interesting because we actually were able to have more nets open this year than last year. We have a little bit of a bigger crew this year. And so, you know, we were catching less birds with more nets open. So that was really concerning. It's been generally a little bit colder this year. And you know, we've observed this, and I've also heard this from a lot of the birders that we've, you know, interacted with visiting the station, that migration seems to be pretty late this year. So I was getting very concerned that we would just not have a peak, and it would just be really slow all season, and, you know, maybe we'd get like 40 birds one day. However, just in the past week, it has picked up really rapidly. So a few days ago, we had our first day. We had 31 birds, and then the next day, or it might not have been, I don't think it was exactly the next day, because then we had a day with bad weather that was lower. But anyways, very soon after that, then we had a day with 65 birds. We were like, okay, it's picking up. Yesterday we caught 123 birds. And so that's, you know, significantly higher than our highest day last year. And we have generally been able to keep more nets open, bigger crew. So that's definitely a contributing factor. Today was back down to 72, which is still really great. And you know, kind of what we're expecting of like jumping up and down as different waves of migrants come through. So that has been really reassuring to see that, like, okay, it's not just going to be slow all year. We're actually getting birds. It seems like there's been a delay in migration this year, and now, you know, maybe the weather's improving a little bit, and birds are arriving in more of a rush than they were last year. So that's been really interesting to see. I am anticipating that our total will be pretty similar to last year at the end of the season, just not distributed in quite the same way, but we'll see. And then a little bit about fall seasons. So I have some photos here of the species that we were catching, which I think is particularly interesting. First, the maybe slightly less interesting numbers. Fall 2005 and 2006, both 4,000 plus birds, 4,388, 4,634. This past fall, we had 3,930. So that's obviously a pretty big dip. This past fall at our Lucky Peak station in Boise was also one of our lowest seasons. I believe it was the second lowest season on record. It was also a very strange year where nearly 600 of our captures were red-breasted nuthatches and mountain chickadees, which usually do not make up nearly that high of a proportion of our captures. And so in some ways, the fact that so many of our captures were those species is concerning because it was the second lowest year on record, but in reality, for the majority of our species, it was the worst year for them. And so, we're seeing similar things at Camas. I was actually somewhat surprised at how many birds Camas did get in the fall, because Camas was on par with Lucky. Lucky ended up a little bit higher, but Camas was pretty close, which is surprising because Lucky Peak is very intact habitat. It's got a lot of live vegetation. At Camas, the area that we have our nets has a lot of dead vegetation. That as Tim mentioned, there's all of these restoration efforts that are working on restoring that, but it's still a lot less live vegetation than there was back in 2005 to 2006. So it's really impressive, honestly, that we're getting the amount of birds that we are. The species composition has changed quite a bit. So in the 2005 to 2006 fall seasons, there was a huge number of Wilson's warblers, which I'll talk about a little bit more in depth, I believe, on the next slide. Generally, a higher proportion of species that are associated with more woodland and riparian habitat. So more warblers, more birds that like more of the denser, more lush vegetation, less of the more open country birds. This past fall, a much higher proportion of the birds we're catching have been more of the open country birds. So sage thrasher is one example. The Curr in the fall caught a lot of sage thrashers, where I think very, very few were caught in the 2005 to 2006 seasons. Similar thing with this lark sparrow here. They caught a decent amount of lark sparrows in the fall, and that was not a common capture. Generally, we've seen a shift from primarily woodland species to more of these open country species. Also a lot more white-crowned sparrows. However, a really big proportion of the captures for fall 2023 was house sparrows, which is, as many people probably know, an invasive species that was, introduced. They're native to Europe. They caught nearly 350 house sparrows last year. So a huge proportion of this was house sparrows, which we don't want to be catching. So that was also interesting to see. In the spring, we caught last spring season 20-something house sparrows, and I think we'll probably be about the same this year. Maybe a little bit less, but we'll see. We're still only a little over halfway through the season. So get a little bit more in depth about Wilson's warblers that as Tim mentioned. Camas is known for having a huge population of Wilson's warblers that pass through the site. That is one species that in particular we've seen a big dip in from the 2005 to 2007 research, and then now. So fall 2005 and 2006 were around 1,800 birds. Last fall was 734. And then the spring seasons don't see nearly as the numbers that the fall season does. But still a pretty big difference from 280-ish, 255 to then 99 last spring. And then this spring will probably be about on track for that similar number. And so, that's pretty concerning. And that's a big reflection of the change in habitat, where the drop in numbers that we've seen is not proportional for all species. Some species have had a huge drop in numbers. Some species we're catching more of. And so there's been a pretty significant change in habitat that we've seen at the site. Another really interesting thing that I've noticed just comparing between the two seasons is it seems like there's a change in age demographics. So this photo here is showing an example, and this is actually from our Lucky Peak site. This is two lazuli bunting wings. The bird on the left here is a second year bird. So that this is a pretty old picture, but say this was taken this year. The second year bird would be a bird that hatched last year. And the way we can tell that is with lazuli buntings, it is a little bit more obvious than it is on a lot of species. But you can see these feathers here, these are the primary coverts, are brown, as are a lot of these feathers here in the wings. So these are primaries and secondaries. And then you have a contrast with these feathers that are black with blue and white edging, black with blue edging, and then these 5 outer primaries are also darker. So that's what we call a molt limit, where we have a limit between newer replaced feathers and older juvenile feathers. And that's indicative of a second year bird, because a bird in its first year of life doesn't replace all of its flight feathers like an adult bird does. This is a after second year bird here on the right. You can see everything is really nice, dark blue edging. And so that's a bird that in the fall had replaced all of its feathers, which is indicative of an older bird. So that, if we'd caught this bird this year, that would be a bird that hatched in 2022 or earlier. We can't, for songbirds, we generally can't tell any more specific than that. The proportion of second years to after second years can be an important indicator of how a breeding season, maybe went the previous year, or what the habitat is like to support breeding at the site. And so what I have noticed this year is a much higher proportion of after second year birds than we had last year. So I know these numbers don't add up to 100. We can't age 100% of the birds to say like, oh, this is a second year or after second year. The remaining percentage of birds is birds that we were saying, well, we know they hatched at last year minimum, but we're not sure if they're a second year or an after second year. And then like a handful of juveniles. Generally, our season ends too soon to catch juveniles. We actually had our first juvenile bird today. Unfortunately, it was a European starling. Didn't mean to click back. Anyways, so what you can see here is last spring season, we had roughly similar amount of second year and after second year birds, slightly more second years than after second years. This year, it's quite different. There's a much higher proportion of after second year birds. And that tells me last year, for the birds that we're catching, did not have a great breeding season, because we're not catching a lot of birds that hatched last year. So not a lot of birds were, at least this is the likely explanation, is that not a lot of these birds hatched last year, which matches what we were seeing on our Lucky Peak site, where we just generally had a very slow year. And so that's another point that a little red flag about the bird populations if we're catching such a high percentage of after second year birds. And it's like, oh, maybe they didn't do so well last year. And then to kind of finish off my section of the presentation, and just talk about a few exciting captures we had last year and then this year. So this is a photo. This is a different perspective on the nice photo that Tim showed of the black-throated green warbler, who we banded. She was an after second year female, and the third state record, and I was really honored to be able to band that bird. It was one of my favorite banding memories. And I think people, myself included, often wonder about like, how are these birds that are way out of range doing? Most of the vagrant birds that I have captured and banded have been in good health. She actually had like a decent amount of fat, no indication that there was really anything wrong with her. Obviously, something happened to blow her that far off course, whether that's, a fault in her navigational abilities or a weather event, but she was doing pretty well. She was seen throughout the day after we banded her, and then presumably left for somewhere else, hopefully more along her correct migration path, probably that night. And then in the fall season, some other exciting captures. There's a Pacific wren, not a major vagrant, but not something that we're necessarily expecting to catch. So that was really fun to see. The crew also caught a surprising number of loggerhead shrikes, which I think everybody was really excited about at first, and then maybe got a little sick of them, as they do bite and have very sharp bills. Unfortunately, I was not there in the fall season except for like a week when they had stopped catching shrikes. So I'm actually really looking forward to that for next fall, where I'm going to be there more at the beginning of the season to get to band one. But that kind of also ties into what I was saying about more open country species like loggerhead shrikes, where these are seem to be mostly juveniles that are dispersing into the area and getting into our nets. And then, so this year so far, just a few highlights. We have caught 3 different long-eared owls now. This is a photo of an adult male. It seems to be a really good breeding season for a variety of owl species. A lot of long-eared and short-eared owls have been seen around the refuge. We had a few long-eared owl families near where we were, which have mostly dispersed now. It's been, I think almost a week since we've seen any of them, which we're a little bit sad about. But we were, it was really great for us to get to see them throughout the season and to catch and band a few of the adults. Just today, we caught an ovenbird, which was really exciting. We actually caught an ovenbird last spring too, and I believe 1 or 2 were caught back in the 2005 to 2007 iteration of this study here. So that was really exciting to see another one today. Probably the only one we're going to catch this season, and that was our first like real vagrant. Another bird that I really enjoyed, we caught a rock wren about a week ago, which was just really unexpected for the habitat. I associate them more with rocks and more rocky sagebrushy habitat, and there is sagebrush really close to where we are. This is probably a bird that was migrating through. Birds during migration will often be found in habitats that they aren't typically found elsewhere. At other times of the year. But yeah, that was really not a bird we were expecting to catch. So that was really cool to see. And that about wraps up what I have prepared. But I am also more than happy to answer questions if anyone has any.
Wow, that is so exciting, Lucian. That is, you just bring it to life. That's really awesome. I'm glad we have such a super ambassador out there in the research world. So we do just have a couple minutes left. If anybody does have a question, you can put it in the chat. I think that Tim gave some awesome directions, and you have a real good idea where Camas is, and go over there and not disturb Lucian, but watch the banders work. They're not like shut up in some top secret thing. They're just out there in the wilds. Okay, any questions coming in? This is awesome. It makes me want to organize a Golden Eagle Audubon trip over there one of these seasons and stay at one of those new rooms or something like that over there. Hey guys, let's give it up for Tim Reynolds and all the amazing work that Friends of Camas does. That list of activities just looked awesome, and really nice pictures that you captured. And we'll try and send some people over there to do that walk, the refuge walk for the wild in the fall. And we'll make sure that you get good weather too, Tim. You deserve it. And Lucian, we'll look forward to seeing you back here also in Boise, up at Lucky Peak. Do you band on a regular basis or just certain days, Lucian?
We band every day. So spring season will go until June 15th, and then our fall season will go from July 21st to October 15th, 7 days a week, aside from weather days. But if the weather's okay, we'll be out banding.
That is right. Tim, any final words?
We just thank you for your endurance.
Oh, no, it's great. It's super. And I want to thank everybody for being here. You guys can put your thanks in the chat. Those are great messages to come through. Everybody's saying awesome, great program. And I'll put this up. It'll go up into our Golden Eagle Audubon YouTube channel, and people will be able to watch it. And we'll continue to highlight the great work of Friends of Camas. I hope that the birdathon goes super great this week. And Intermountain Bird Observatory, Lucian didn't mention because he's like got his head in the nest over there, in the nets over there. They are getting ready. It's their 30th anniversary, and they're getting ready for a big anniversary celebration. They've got an online auction right now going on, and so we definitely encourage everybody to support the Intermountain Bird Observatory as well. All right, everybody says thanks, 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 thanks. Let's go over there. Yeah, clap, clap, clap. All right, everybody. Thanks for
Thank
joining
you
us
so
this
much.
evening.
Look forward to seeing you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Okay. Bye, everybody.